welcome to Truth in Motion Studios. This is my YouTube channel. I'm Christina Zakowski, and my guest today is psychotherapist Shane Moe. Hi, Shane.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. So you are a very interesting person. I'm not sure if you think so, but I do think so. You bring a lot of background that puts you in a fabulous position to be a therapist, licensed, and you have a lot of background in theology and philosophy. So I appreciate about you already the breadth and depth of the thought that you bring, from your immediate background then to therapy. So, but this is a podcast, or this is a channel about healing from spiritual abuse and maybe rethinking faith. I was hoping to have a conversation with you on how you meet people that are in fundamentalism. We chatted a little bit before, and you were saying that because of your background, your educational background, you tend to get the referrals for people that bring up faith, though also a lot of people don't know that they actually need healing from their faith. So very all sensitive and difficult. So I appreciate that you venture out with me here into this difficult and yet so important topic.
Yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah. So what is your interest? Why, from your years in seminary and in grad school, why did you decide to venture into psychotherapy on top of everything else?
Yeah, well, I, for a good long time, dating back to probably my late teens, early 20s, I wanted to be a counselor and a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so at one point, had thought about majoring in psych, decided not to, had thought about becoming wanted to become a professor of kind of philosophy and theology, decided not to, had so much history and involvement in church that I thought, well, hey, pastors, they do both, they counsel and teach, so then maybe I'll go that way. And so I got a scholarship that took me up to seminary in Minneapolis and in Twin Cities. And so ended up doing an MDiv there with the plan of going into pastoral ministry, again, wanting to counsel and teach, but over the course of that kind of, learned more and became very clear that I have no interest in leading ministries or directing churches, staffs, things like that. And so the seminary I was in had a great marriage and family therapy program, and I had taken a course in family systems, kind of family systems theory and therapy, and had already come into seminary with the conviction that, like, the relationships in our lives and tend to be the most powerful, things impacting us often, right, shaping us. And so I ended up then finishing an MDiv that had a concentration in what they called Christian thought, basically kind of the intersection of philosophy, theology, apologetics, culture, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I like to call it inter-ideological engagement. That's a big focal piece of it. And so finished the MDiv, just kind of rolled right into the marriage and family therapy graduate program, and then did that. So it ended up being 6 years worth of, kind of seminary, evangelical seminary experience before I was all done. And then, ended up doing work started with an internship in an faith-based addiction recovery, residential addiction recovery facility, and was there about 4 years full time, and then transitioned to a large group private practice. I've kind of been there since, and then still contracted for another 5 or so years with that addiction recovery facility, or subcontracted kind of. And so, I've kind of worked with a lot of Christian clientele over the years, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
The question, or maybe it's more than you needed. But.
Yeah, no, always good to know more background. The people who watch my videos and that I'm meeting online, and also sometimes meeting in person, we sometimes don't, when you have that opportunity to hear someone's story and someone's fears, you realize, wow, there's a lot of similarity, and you couldn't tell just by looking at a person. You actually needed to have heart to realize how much you have in common. So the people that I'm connecting with and who are connecting with my material here, they came out of abusive situations that they didn't always know were abusive, but they know they need help. Now, I am aware that there's a spectrum. You know, when you come out of a group, a faith group, you get kicked out or you leave because you're fleeing. Maybe it was like a last survival effort was to leave. People are on a spectrum of how fed up they are with their faith or how clearly they see stuff. What often people will say is online and in forums, do you guys know of any good biblical counselors? Because they are still so afraid of the world that they think they need these terms, but they need to be good. You know, it can't just be any biblical counseling. It needs to be like, can you refer me to a good one? What is your response to that?
Ooh, yeah, we could spend a whole hour just talking about that. Counseling often goes awry or becomes unhelpful at best, harmful at worst, often if it's very kind of should based or should driven. Whether the shoulds are explicit, overt, or implicit, covert. And so often, you know, biblical counseling traditions have a lot of should based, right? Well, this should be what's going to heal or help you. You know, you should just study more scripture or pray more, you know, or you should just forgive, you know, somebody who abused you, as if this is just kind of the, you know, the fix, right? And, you know, whether somebody's coming from a faith-based approach with biblical counseling or any other, frankly, model of counseling or therapy, if they have their kind of upfront template and they try to wedge somebody into that, you know, you should, you know, heal through these methods and interventions. You know, shoulding, you know, adds a lot more burden, a lot more pressure. And so, you know, so often with biblical counseling, people are pulling in a lot of biblically buttressed kind of, you know, shoulds. You know, you should think, feel, and do, and you know, this is the formula, and it wreaks a lot of havoc. You know, I've had a lot of clients over the years who, you know, a decent amount of our work, you know, ended up being like addressing the compounded shame and anxiety, you know, that they've gotten from prior counselors who thought, you know, we should just use the Bible and that's sort of the, you know, the panacea, you know, the kind of the fix all. And so, you know, there's kind of biblical counseling and nouthetic counseling approaches, right, that are like, you know, maybe Bible only. Anything mainstream social science might be suspect, right, or it's going to pull us away from God or faithfulness. And then kind of move down the continuum. Some will identify as Christian counselors, and they can be on a spectrum of how integrative they are with mainstream social science. Some are closer to the biblical counseling or nouthetic, you know, Bible only counseling end of the spectrum. Whether they will name it or not. You know, others might be a lot more integrative, like, you know, let's bring in the best of both what scripture has to say and the kind of the deliverances of the mainstream social sciences, what we've learned about humanity, you know, things like that over the years. And so, you know, quite honestly, I tend to be, you know, I tend to be hesitant and want to investigate more before I would refer anybody to, you know, even a quote Christian counselor or somebody who operates under the banner of Christian counseling, because that's often a proxy for biblical or nouthetic counseling. And would frankly, myself would never refer somebody to somebody who operates under the banner of biblical counseling, because that tends to involve a lot of implicit shoulding based on the therapist's understanding of the Bible, their interpretive paradigm, right, whatever that is, which they might just equate with the Bible or God, right? I don't interpret the Bible, I just know it. You know, my thoughts are God's thoughts, that kind of stuff. So anyway, is that at all, is that answering your question much?
Yeah. Responding, I like that idea. You know, you're responding to it. Answers like, yes, I hit the box, you know, but a response is just, you know, you throw something back and So that was a good response. The fear that you would have, or the concern that because people read the Bible their way, that they might believe in magical formulas. And I have found myself at the receiving end of being the person that is supposed to get healed a certain way, and then when that doesn't work, yes, the shame. Like, what is wrong with you that God's grace is not good enough for you? And then I have to also say, I've been the person who has done that to others, because you get into this, in this culture where it's like, well, of course, we have this book with magical formulas. And if you just believe enough, that's what Jesus says, then you should be basically able to fly. And unfortunately, I mean, I've not met anyone who can actually fly. So there's a lot of inherent lying or hypocrisy, pretending, and the shame that comes from knowing that, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, you're not this and that, or you're not perfect. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'll often tell clients, you know, whether it's in one-on-one sessions or in kind of group sessions, I do a lot of what they call DBT therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, which involves some group sessions and a lot of teaching and curriculum and stuff. You know, I'll often say that, you know, shoulding is shaming, and shoulding is shoving. So shoulding, like, you know, if you're being, this should, you shouldn't do this, you should be doing that, or this should be working. It's not, you know, you shouldn't be, like, it adds more shame, right? And that shoulding almost is like a law-based approach, right? You know, this is the law, you're not honoring the law, so, you know, you're bad. And you know, then shoulding is shoving. Like, when people are shoulding us, there's a, it almost feels like an abrasive kind of a control kind of a thing, right? Somebody's trying to make our decisions for us, you know, push us in a certain direction, and so and then people internalize all that, and then they're shoulding and shoving and, you know, themselves a lot, and that's part of what's amplifying, sustaining and amplifying their mental and emotional relational health problems, struggles. So
yeah. And it sounds like that's, we both have a perspective of the church where an issue is that people are perpetuated in a certain kind of cycle, and I'm saying we both disagree with me, please, if that's not, if I'm not paraphrasing that correctly, where they show up and the expectation is not that they actually ever grow up. The expectation is that they keep showing up, and that's what keeps the system going. And so in that sense, in that culture where your job is to show up Sunday morning and maybe on Wednesday night and send your kids or whatever, then if someone tells you, well, here are the bars that you have to, the boxes you have to check, then that makes perfect sense, because you're in a system where you're a sheep and there's a pastor who knows better, and you should trust them, because, you know, you should trust them, and trusting them means trusting God. So what could possibly go wrong?
yeah, and if this doesn't work, therefore there's something wrong with you. Right, there's kind of that implicit oftentimes, and there can be a bit of a you know, kind of a almost rescuer mentality and savior kind of mentality from, you know, whether pastors, therapists can fall into this, you know, and it can lead to, you know, a lot of unhealthy dependence, you know, even kind of codependency, you know, codependent relationships between pastor and congregant, or congregation, therapist and client, and not helpful, and keeps people in some ways stuck in dependence rather than helping them, you know, move through healthy, you know, dependence to independence to you know, dependence, and things like that. And, you know, any good, you know, skilled therapist is, in some ways, they're trying to work themselves out of a job. Right, they're trying to help their client get what they need to be, you know, empowered enough within themselves and accessing additional resources to be able to move forward without requiring the, you know, the therapist services. And, you know, similarly, kind of back to, you know, a therapist's identification, you know, as just therapist simpliciter, no Christian, no biblical, or Christian counselor, or nouthetic counseling. Like, any decent, good, skilled therapist should be able to work with somebody's faith system and utilize it in helpful or skillful ways. You know, so And sometimes people are bringing in, some unhealthy coping, from their spiritual system. And like a therapist will kind of meet them where they're at, but also help them see more and more like what's actually effective, helpful here, or what's keeping you stuck. And like you said earlier, oftentimes it is people's spiritual templates and practices and things that are keeping them stuck and inhibiting their, not only part of the problem that brought them in, but part of what keeps them from being able to, heal and get more freedom moving forward. And so,
when I was early 20s and I went to a psychotherapist that was worldly, I remember feeling, oh, this is a risk. I was hyper tuned for ways that person might question my faith, because that was how I was raised. You don't believe those people because they can talk you out of your faith. That is their desire. So vilifying the unknown. And when that therapist, in one of our first few sessions, after I kind of laid out my life plan that, there's the world, the whole God world, and then I want to become a famous actress. And so but I'm also very suicidal and I don't know what to do with myself. And so I remember him referring to my thought world as that I have these two fantasy worlds, that there's this God world and then there's this acting world. And the point is, he was right. He made a accurate observation, but that was the thing. That was my red flag, where I was like, I'm out of here. I'm never coming back. And I never went back. And then I joined a cult, because they spoke the right language and added that whole should mechanism to the nth degree. And from there on, that's what I needed. I needed in the sense of, for my eyes to come open to that even the little bit is junk. The little bit is still not good. And so, but the extreme that I experienced helped me realize this is not working. And I have come to the place where I can say it's not me. The reason why I'm not better, or people around me are not getting better, it's not on them. There's something else going on. And at that time, it was all very confusing.
Yeah. There's a problem in the system, right? And what I'm experiencing is maybe symptomatic of a toxic or unhealthy, problematic, dysfunctional system, rather than just I'm just unhealthy, toxic, or dysfunctional, or there's something wrong with me, right? So like my training was in marriage and family therapy, which is one of the kind of licenses and domains of mental health professionals in Minnesota. So there's, licensed professional clinical counselors focused just on counseling stuff, licensed psychologists focused more on assessment, psychological evaluation testing. There's, licensed independent clinical social workers. They're trained with a little more community resource, kind of things. Well, marriage and family therapy in some ways is kind of a bridge between, individual mental health and counseling and more systemic or relational work, like, both social work and family work. And so, yeah, we're kind of trained to not just see the individual in isolation, but to see them in the context of their relational realities. And oftentimes, people are experiencing something that's symptomatic of a really problematic system. They're where the symptoms are manifesting or standing out, even though there's unhealth or ill health or unwellness throughout the system.
Yeah. So my father was not part of the church that I grew up in, Baptist fundamentalist, but friendly, fairly casual, especially compared to what you hear from the US with the Southern Baptists. So, but still fundamentalist enough that I can look back now and say that's where I learned to accept certain rigidity and accept that, okay, so we know all the answers. The key point is to just remember all of them and ask the pastor, but we do have all the answers and everybody should listen to us talk. So he was not part of that. He was raised Catholic and didn't want to have anything to do with church. Well, it was somehow the message manifested in me that I need to save him from going to hell forever and ever. And I could, for some reason, not worry about other people so much, but with him, that was, from little on, a major stressor that I remember bringing up often. And when we would go to retreats or something like that, and there would be like a counselor, or like a camp counselor, and they would confirm my fears. They would say, because they themselves came from that same thought system, that God will try so many times to knock at his door. And when he keeps saying no, then at some point God will stop. And so that put fear in my life and a responsibility that I could just not live up to. I remember I don't even know why, one time I opened a letter that I saw in my parents' house. I don't know why. I was a young teenager. I opened this letter and I saw in there that it said my father got some kind of a diagnosis that he gets to have a special parking permit because he has some kind of a disability. And I think it was because of his hip or something like that. So, he was allowed to park closer to the doors. That freaked me out because I thought he was going to die soon and we were running out of time. And so my sisters they did not take that message, or they didn't take it to heart or something like that. It was me and the way my brain works, that it was torment.
Yeah.
How do you respond to people reporting things like that?
Yeah. Those beliefs about the ever-present specter of eternal conscious torment and hell, right? Kind of the eternal, abuse or abandonment, of God. However you kind of look at that, and I get the arguments about no, we're abandoning God, but yeah, that creates a tremendously anxious, system,
Yeah.
and then very anxious people within the system, who can have anxiety about, like, yeah, there's constant threat, right, of this, because anybody could die at any time, or anybody could impact our beliefs at any time, and that could put us in danger territory, or we need to rescue and save others from this constant ever, present threat, and then deep shame if we feel like we haven't, or that maybe we failed, or maybe we're not the real thing. Maybe we're not really saved, or God's chosen, or God, or just the constant self-doubt and questioning can be big pieces of that. And so yeah, I mean, when people come with those kind of patterns and struggles, we talk about it from education about anxiety and things like that, and help them to kind of notice how do these different beliefs and things impact the way you experience yourself, experience others, experience God, and where do you notice that in your body? In some ways we help people get out of their heads and be able to get in the present moment and notice more what they're experiencing. And noticed you did a podcast on mindfulness a ways back, and mindfulness is central to the DBT therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, that I've done for 7 years or 8 years here. So I do mindfulness all the time with clients, and noticing kind of that, how do you experience those judgments, on yourself in the present moment in your body? How's this working for you? Is it helpful? Does it feel conducive to things like the fruit of the spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Or is it actually creating a lot of problems with some of those? Does it help you experience more of the characteristics of love and 1 Corinthians 13, right? Patient, kind, not envious, not boastful, not proud, all that good stuff. And the characteristics of wisdom in James, I think 3, wisdom from above, or from heavenly wisdom, pure, peace loving, considerate, submissive. Like telling that one to some guys, right? Mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere, and kind of, people can often start to see that, like, oh, wow, some of this heavy anxiety I have and these beliefs that keep it propped up, it's actually working against me experiencing the spirit, and some of those fruit, of the spirit in Galatians 5 or whatever, and some of those characteristics of love in 1 Corinthians 13, and characteristics of heavenly wisdom or wisdom from above, in James 3. And sometimes that can help people kind of loosen up a little bit on some of the firm beliefs that have been maybe part of the problem for them.
That's interesting. So observing how what you believe actually affects you, how it makes you feel, and then realizing, oh, that's actually a negative effect. The way I'm believing affects me negatively. Now, I feel like the way my faith communities have always handled this kind of realization, like how horrible, like even to say this baby deserves to go to hell, like how horrible. But then it's like, yeah, that's how ugly sin is. And then you go into a place of, we like to say this, God loves the sinner, not the sin, as if there was a separation. And what ends up realistically happening is this othering of people, of groups. I remember thinking to myself, when certain natural disasters happen around the world, yeah, that's what you get for paganism. So it's like it turned me into a very judgmental person who had to shut myself off from my feelings of just complete powerlessness and sadness in the face of suffering. But I answered it for myself too. If I were going through something terrible, it's either the devil is after me or I'm in secret sin, and so I deserve it, kind of a thing. So it turned me into a not loving person, thinking though that all the sacrificing of that niceness, that is the real love, because falling into the hands of the living God is terrible, right? Isn't that the verse? Yeah. My cult love that verse. It's terrible. So whatever you're experiencing right now, it's better than falling into the hands of the living God.
Yeah. Lots of kind of fear substrate underneath all that, right? Fear and shame become kind of the dynamics of, how we relate or talk or interact in systems like that. And fear and shame are kind of very intimately connected with control. You see that in family systems, you can see that in churches, businesses, right? Even our internal system, there's a whole model of therapy out there called the internal family systems model of therapy, which looks at kind of how different parts of us relate and interact in systemic dynamics and ways. And we can have parts of us that are heavily controlling, heavily shaming, heavily afraid, and then these interact in ways that create a lot of our distress and keep us stuck and amplify problems rather than improve them. So
That's fascinating to say that we do that to ourselves too. And I think that's what is very observable in these online forums of where spiritual abuse victims come in at any level of the spectrum, full clear or completely confused and afraid. And they will say that whatever their questions are, they know they're not supposed to ask those questions. And so we do this to ourselves.
With working with, so a lot of my clients that I work with, are, victims. Some have been perpetrators, of abuse in their family systems and intimate partnerships. And and we'll talk about, sometimes what they call no talk rules in families where there's abuse or, some messy, toxic dynamics going on, or sometimes in families that, some therapists will call the narcissistic family system, which doesn't necessarily mean there's somebody with a clinical narcissistic personality disorder, there, but that the system is set up for the children to take care of or meet the emotional needs of the parent. So inverted caretaking, right? Inverted responsibility. And we'll talk about how those family systems often have no talk rules, where there are things we're not supposed to say, not supposed to acknowledge, questions we can't ask, maybe emotions we can't express, certain needs we can't have, right? Behaviors we can't do, and it becomes, it can become a very suppressive system where people are constantly suppressing maybe very natural, valid needs, thoughts, questions, concerns, right? And I often tell clients, suppression, is often oppression.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of internal oppression that then we're internalizing, then the dynamics of the external system get internalized in our internal system. And now here this virus kind of, is wreaking havoc and scrambling our software and creating problems. So
Yeah. So it sounds like you don't tell people then what to think. You just help them become mindful of what they're experiencing internally.
and help them see kind of like, what is this producing in your life, relationally, emotionally, things like that. So, even clients that, come in with, let's say, heavily, rigidly, spiritually defensive, you know, um, beliefs that are maybe keeping them stuck, maybe they have a lot of what they call spiritual bypassing going on, where they're using their spiritual beliefs and practices to, sidestep or avoid facing, feeling, and dealing with unresolved stuff internally, right? It becomes kind of their escape mechanism, or kind of a drug of choice, you might say. Even people coming in with that, again, I don't go into should territory. If I'm trying to should somebody, you shouldn't be thinking that or believing that, or you should really think or do this instead. Shoulding tends to just activate people's defenses anyway, and not helpful. It's not effective. And even if a should statement is, let's say, accurate, doesn't matter because it's not the accuracy or the truth of it that's gonna be effective or helpful. It's, they have to have receptivity. They have to have a relational context where they're able to kind of eventually come to adopt that truth, maybe themselves, or kind of taste and see that, like, oh wow, there's freedom in this, and there's healing and love, and trust or trustworthiness, so faith, right, hope, love in this, versus like the stuff they've often been trying to should and force in their own life. I've kept dealing with things through these mechanisms because I think I should. I should make sure I never miss my morning devotions, and that's what's going to make sure I don't struggle. Or I should pray, a certain amount or in a certain way or whatever, and that's what's going to surely deliver me or get me out. And they're stuck, and a lot of internal suppressive and oppressive shoulding and shaming, which creates anxiety, which creates more shoulding and shame. So yeah.
And then,
So
of course,
short answer to that's a long answer to a short question, but short answer is no. I try to avoid, telling clients, what to do or making their decisions for them. And sometimes somebody once even said, something like, counselors have great, have good advice. Therapists ask good questions. So again, sometimes people counseling, some semantics in this, but some people are trying to fix or provide the rescue or whatever, and they get really advicey, which is something that often happens. And, it can happen anywhere along the spectrum of, faith and right and left and whatever amongst therapists, but biblical and nouthetic counseling often involves a lot of advice, because God gave us the advice book, right? The Bible. And so clearly the answer is going to be in there for anything and everything you're struggling with right now. And people then start to try to tell people the fix or the answers, and which, can actually disempower the person, because even if they take it and it works, they haven't developed maybe more internal, empowerment or ability or confidence, and they can remain dependent on all the external advice or on the fixer or the savior or the rescuer, right? And then it just replicates, later. And so
this reminds me of a rather innocent but memory that stuck with me when we had in Germany, in my Baptist church, a missionary choir come to our church from Africa. I don't remember, Kenya. It was Africa, and an African choir. There was this dinner, and I sat next to a man, and we started talking, and I think he mostly spoke English. So this is education in Germany. We learn English starting, I did at 5th grade. So by that time, I was definitely able to have a good conversation with him. And he seemed so much younger than he actually was. And I realized that when he was referring to himself that he has grandbabies. And I was like, what? I thought you were like, I don't know, 40. And so then I opened up a little bit and said that I'm not feeling good, that I'm just not happy. And his response, and I think I had my old Luther Bible that had all the stickers that I just got every time I went to Bible camp, and you get when you memorize the verses, it was covered in stickers. I had to open it up and put stickers inside. I had so many stickers. I have this Bible somewhere, I think in a different bookshelf, but he pointed at it and said, you need to read your Bible and pray every day if you want to be well. Like there's a song, something like it, read the Bible, pray every day, something. And if you wanted to go well with you, that was his message. And it struck me as both true, but also as it's not working, man.
Yeah, it's not effective, right? And then kind of we'll do more of what's just not working. Like,
yeah,
that good advice. I think what Scott McKnight once said, right is not right if it is also not good. Right? It's like, okay, so maybe you're convinced you're right that this is the way to go, but it's not good or helpful or freeing or healing, right? And so somebody being like, well, you should just keep doing that. Well, that turns into almost inverted caretaking, almost like, I need you to do this so that I feel effective. As a therapist or as a counselor or as a pastor or whatever, I need you to do this and get healed. So I feel like I've done the right thing, and I feel like I've been, and then that can turn into, some inverted caretaking and not actually pursuing what's in the best interests of the client, and is it in the client's best interest to keep trying to force the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? Right, defined insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And people can get stuck in that if they think this is supposed to be the fix and I'm going to keep doing it, despite the fact that maybe the more I do it, the more anxiety and shame I feel and the more stuck I am, and now I want to medicate through something to escape it all.
Yeah. And I would say that attitude, though, for my history of being set up for fundamentalism, if you will, and in my personal thinking helped with that. So it's biology and nurture and nature. Who can say which was which? I just don't know that stuff. But that I needed to seek it out to the extreme to realize how important it is to look at what do I actually believe. Because in my cult years, that was what was attractive to me. I had gotten to a place where they raised some kind of good pride in me, like you call yourself a Christian and you're so depressed all the time that but they had a good point, and it's like, yes, like, why is that? And I'm not saying that's exactly it. And I don't know why other people have depression, and I don't know how to heal them. I know that I had a lot of terrible thinking, a lot of fears, that they kept me stuck in a black hole, not believing that I will ever make good choices, that I can become an adult that is responsible and has just a good life. I just did not believe that for myself. And so for me, the cure was clearly connected to changing my thinking, and I needed to go that direction. But then also that turned, there was like the first half year where it seemed like, ooh, Christina is developing in a healthy direction, and my parents thought so too. But then it came down to those leaders being so controlling and owning me and others, that it turned into an extreme nightmare for everybody involved. But we're trying to get at is that coming out of that, it still took me years to disagree with that view of God. I think at first I was drawn to the same kinds of churches, the same kinds of fellowships. And it was my husband who was one of the first people to, that's actually a book that I want to write at some point. Maybe I write it when I retire, but it's let's not join a cult for a bit.
Which happens to be good advice, right?
That was just my husband speaking from his heart when I wanted to to join a thing here in Minnesota that you probably have heard about too, but it's yeah, also it's the same thing. It was exactly the same thing, just with a little bit nicer people on the front end than we had been kicked out of in Germany. So how important it is what we believe, and how difficult it is to allow yourself to ask those questions. Now, with the mindfulness piece, I know how people would call me a false teacher for this, but I would like to run this thought by you. Now, if you believe that you can sense in your body if something serves you well or not, like that anxiety, does that serve you well? And then you try positive thought, you try to remember your gratitude, but real gratitude, not made up, like real, I'm so grateful that I have this and that, or that I get to experience this and that. Or what if God is so big that we keep on saying, God, come, well, what is if he's already here? What if the good news are so good that we actually don't have any reason to be afraid? And then that's why Jesus kept saying, don't be troubled, do not be afraid. You know, the angels, everybody keeps saying the same thing to humankind, do not be afraid. What if that's true? And then how that feels in the body, is that something I can trust?
Well, and there's one biblical scholar that I think tallied up about 366 instances in the Bible of some variation of fear not, do not be afraid, be courageous, right? And then, take a statement like, perfect love casts out fear. It's like, okay, if our beliefs and practices are serving to feed and fuel, our fear and anxiety, that presents a rub, maybe for some of those, biblical statements about fear and being not afraid or being liberated from that. And so, maybe our beliefs or our practices, or our beliefs about our practices are, feeding more the very fear that Jesus is seeking to liberate us from, right? And yeah. And then, of course, fear and shame naturally create defenses. When we have, parts of us, you might say, that carry burdens of fear and shame, then, we can develop very protective, defensive parts of us. It can create defensiveness that, can utilize our spiritual beliefs, convictions, spiritual authorities, book texts, right, to keep defending. But then the defensiveness keeps us stuck. That's how defenses, psychosocial defenses, work. They keep us often, they maybe did help and served us well back in the midst of imminent threat or danger. I needed to be avoidant because, like, if I were seen or present, the hammer was dropped, I was not safe, right? Or I had to do things to be seen, but they weren't, and now they're not serving me, right? They're not helpful now. Now they're maladaptive. They're creating more problems than they're solving. Jesus seems to model a pretty non-defensive, right? Spirituality, embracing of vulnerability, right? That power and healing come kind of through, that versus through the denial and defenses of it.
How do we miss that so badly?
Well, humanity is, I often say humanity is nothing if not defensive, right? In a lot of ways, human history is a narrative of humanity's defensiveness in a lot of ways. And so, often shoulding drives more defensiveness, right? I should do this because if I don't, bad things will happen. And it's very human to not to be defensive and then not even know we're defensive. And to not know that, oh, wow, maybe I have a spiritual system or framework that has been totally co-opted into my defenses, or that, is how all my defenses cash out, So I'm going to just let go and let God rather than maybe acknowledge the fact that, like, I'm struggling with, something, regarding God, or
So that humanity piece, that's been something that's come become big in my new philosophy, if you will, new as in I didn't used to believe that, but I've changed my mind. Now I believe humanity is complex, and when a lot of people in faith systems kind of think of people as good or bad, and in kind of Jesus's words with that tree, they didn't really help, because a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit and vice versa. But it seems like there is a mix. We're such a mixed bag that how can we help each other be more human? Because what you're describing, vulnerability, Brene Brown likes to talk about all that stuff too, and you know,
Yeah.
how do we help each other that way?
Yeah, I mean, she, as you were talking earlier, I was thinking about, one of her lines. She said, if I'm trying not to butcher it here, but she said, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we're capable of change. And so, the more, if our spiritual system is creating more shame, or just sustaining and amplifying our shame, like, that actually can keep people more stuck, feeling powerless, trapped, hopeless. Shame becomes very self-corrosive, self-destructive. And then now we're, engaging in more, quote, sin to try to maybe even cope with this overwhelming shame. I work with clients for over a decade who, a lot of their very problematic, sinful, quote, behaviors and patterns are like, maladaptive, unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with tremendous shame and anxiety. That maybe we're also very much implanted and driven by the very spiritual systems that are condemning them for their sin. Right? And they get stuck in this nasty feedback loop of, more anxiety and shame leading to more maladaptive, unhealthy coping mechanisms that are called sin, leading back to, so, the nature of shame is to kind of be hidden or not seen, keep things not said under the table. So of course, shame works really well with any abusive or, controlling leadership or parents or systems that want certain things not named, not stated, not, back to the no talk kind of rules. Elephant in the room, we don't acknowledge, the abuse, right? We don't talk about it. And so, how do we help? I mean, that's, in some ways, it's like big question, like, there's so much to that. How do we help people with that? Well, it starts with kind of awareness, mindfulness, acknowledging, like, how are the, the systems and beliefs and things that we're already a part of, or that we carry, how are those, serving to, and our very defenses, how are those serving to actually sustain and amplify our problems, rather than, help us get freedom and healing from it. One thing I've often kind of said, and with clients and classes that I used to teach at the recovery facility I was a part of, was, when you think about somebody's problems, one lens is, well, they're just sinful, bad, wicked, right? Very judgment lens. And like, okay, sinful, bad, wicked, what's a very kind of a natural, what seems like the natural response to that? Well, judgment, condemnation, right? Or punishment or something. But what if instead we see a lens of, okay, not just sinful, bad, wicked, but, sinful, broken, weak, struggling with sinfulness, or sickness, brokenness, weakness, right? Those are both, they're two different lenses, and one lens, just, sinful, wicked, bad, kind of will naturally evoke a different response generally in people than the lens of, okay, sickness, weakness, brokenness. One calls for kind of judgment, condemnation. One kind of naturally calls for healing, right? And then you look at, okay, how did Jesus approach things? He seemed to, approach people, with a desire for, for healing and healing their wounds and their, their traumas and their sicknesses, their struggles, and rather than like having a need to just judge or condemn. And but then of course the people he challenged and pushed against were the spiritual and religious leaders who were very much stuck in the shame, judgment, we're good, you're bad, we're right, you're wrong. All the exclusion and condemnation and judgment and shoulding, right? Lots of shoulding in those systems, Pharisaic systems.
Yeah. So as you said, we start by becoming mindful of our own inner workings.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have a picture of this anywhere. I was going to look and see. I could show it to you, but one thing I've draw it really quick here too. One thing that I've often shared with clients of faith, Christian clients who identify as believers and have faith and stuff, is I'll kind of say, all the relationships that we have in our lives can be pretty conveniently illustrated in the image of a cross. And so, I don't know how well you can see this, but can you kind of sort of see that? My less than stellar drawing skills. So, our quote vertical relationship, right? I'll talk about vertical relationship with God, or you could even say higher power for somebody who identifies, with a different spirituality, the sacred, whatever, vertical beam, relationship with others, right? Other people, horizontal beam. You could even include, relationship with the creation, or, the earth, the bottom of the vertical beam. But then notice where all those intersect. All of those other relationships intersect with relationship with self, which includes, how do I think about myself? How do I take responsibility for or deal with my internal stuff? How do I work on that, right? Self-care, what do I put in my body, right? Like, how do I relate to myself? How do I think about, feel about, treat, take care of, or don't myself, manage, regulate myself, all that. Like, oftentimes people, they want to hide from self in these other areas. A lot of people are trying to hide from self in God.
Yes.
Right? I don't need self-awareness. I just need God awareness, or they're trying to hide in other people, whether to make those people happy, or fixing people, saving, rescuing people, even constant serving, right? A lot of people are stuck in serving actually as an escape from facing, feeling, and dealing with self, so some of the quote codependent, caretaking that can happen in that. People aren't wanting to maybe acknowledge, face, feel, and deal with, like, what's going on within me, kind of flip the proverbial camera lens on your phone from looking out to looking back, and trying to attend to that. And so sometimes I'll share with Christian clients that, you kind of have the greatest commandments nicely illustrated right there, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Vertical beam, love your neighbor. Horizontal beam, as yourself. Where those intersect, and that relationship with self often operates like a filter in some ways that can impact how people experience relationship with others, and how they experience relationship with God or the sacred or whatever. And so, some people have a filter of, a lot of shame and self condemnation and loathing, and that messes with their relationships with God and others, in ways that aren't helping or serving them well or in their best interests. Other people, have a lens of, or have a, relationship with self as one of, grandiosity, arrogance. Sometimes we talk about kind of pride or arrogance and shame even being two sides of can form a circuit where people oscillate between thinking too much of themselves and then thinking too little of themselves, or something, where people can really kind of hang out in one or the other, and that just, it doesn't serve relationship with others well. And so, therapy as a discipline, so much of it is helping people attend to the crossroads of relationships with God and others. Like, let's look internally here and look at you. We don't want to get lost there. We don't want to, a lot of people will pejoratively call this navel gazing, right? But, like, no, we're not doing that just to kind of get lost there, or to avoid other relationships or connection. We want to address it both for internal, psychological and spiritual health, but also for relational health with others, because some people could hide there. I'm just going to hide in thinking about me all the time, and I'm going to avoid relationship with others or attending to how I relate to the sacred and God and things. So sometimes that helps people kind of see, like, this is an important thing to look at. Sometimes that's the starting point. Like, some people, to answer your question, like, how do we help people, with this? Well, some people don't realize, like, they're going to have to become more aware of what they're experiencing in self, you know, to get things in a better place. But that's back to where often sometimes biblical nouthetic types of counseling approaches, sometimes they'll try to fixate on, just more God or just more church or just more Bible. And sometimes they don't have enough, tools and depth and nuances of looking into the self, often not trauma aware, trauma informed, things like that. So.
Yeah. So would you say there's hope for people who were raised or come out of fundamentalism and they're really confused and afraid right now?
Oh gosh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's part of what's been wonderful in my work is to see people who, came in with overwhelming anxiety and shame, often, even obsessive or compulsive self relation behavioral patterns or thought patterns that are just cranking and creating more distress, to be able to see them, soften or become more flexible in some of their thinking and beliefs, about, God, about self, about the world, humanity, and find that they're less, tremendously burdened by these burdens of anxiety and shame. And, it makes it, paradoxically can become easier for them to love, relate to self through love, relate to others through love, to experience God as not the specter of power and control, right? That I need to, appease or make happy or else. It can really reduce a lot of their anxiety and shame. And I've had clients who have said, how come I couldn't get this, what I'm experiencing in therapy here, how come I kind of wish I could have gotten that in my church, and it's oftentimes well, sometimes the church was part of the problem, especially if there are a lot of shoulds and reductionistic views of humanity and of struggle or things like that. So.
I think we had a great conversation. That was good for me to hear your perspective, and my hope that there's a lot of people like you out there is there, because you said that your plate is pretty full and you're booked, and so you're not really looking for new clients or anything. But where could people find someone like you?
Looking for therapists who are really trauma informed is very important. Because when therapists aren't trauma informed, they're often more vulnerable to or inclined to do some of the shoulding. They're more vulnerable or inclined to get stuck in cognitive kind of measures of work and sort of what I call beliefism. Sometimes, they try to we got to get the right beliefs in you and that'll fix everything. And yet they're staying stuck in a part of the brain that's not even where the trauma is stored, and they're in the wrong department. And internal family systems is one therapeutic model that can be really helpful in this domain. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a therapeutic model that can be really helpful in this domain to help people process out, and kind of unburden themselves of the burdens of unpleasant negative thoughts, emotions, even sensations that they've carried from their oppressive spiritual communities or beliefs.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. People can also follow you on Facebook. You have a very entertaining presence there. So I want to recommend Shane Mode to you if you're on Facebook. Thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your perspective with us.
Well, I hope some of it was useful or helpful. I feel like I was kind of all over the place, but hopefully some of it landed or connected. So
yes,
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.